Hello, and welcome to Reasoned Response. This episode is going to talk about the problems facing the most beloved of all pets, dogs. Specifically, the challenges facing pedigree or purebred dogs. Now, before I start, I want to make it clear that this isn't going to be an attack on those of you who own or breed pedigree dogs. This is going to be a frank discussion of what the realities of the current situation are, what are the causes, and what we can do moving forward. The first known remains of a domesticated dog come from almost 14,700 years ago, older than the dawn of agriculture. In fact, dogs were domesticated before any other creature, animal or plant. Their origin lies in a now extinct common ancestor with today's grey wolf, and although modern wolves and dogs are related, modern wolves aren't the ancestor of modern dogs. The particulars of the almost mythical bonding of animal and man are still not known, but the result is a relationship spanning thousands of years that has seen humans and dogs share everything from the thrill of the hunt to the front lines of battle, and where humans have often been found wanting in their compassion, our canine accomplices have responded with boundless loyalty and obedience. Where dogs have been bred for close contact with humans up until the 1800s, dogs were bred to be strong, healthy, and with good temperaments for life in close human contact. This changed during the 19th century and the Victorian era, when it became fashionable to breed dogs to have novel appearances. With dog shows being established around the UK, the hobby of dog breeding became a favourite pastime of many. In order to help regulate the shows and establish standards, the Kennel Club in the UK was set up, with the first stud book published in 1854. These books established the winners of the dog contests. Soon after, the Kennel Club began publishing a register of different dog breeds, including pictures that began to define what is known now as the breed standard. This has evolved into the modern pedigree system, and it is from this initial system that modern breeds have begun to suffer. Why? Well, in order for a dog to be recognised as a pedigreed dog, and thus eligible for showing at a dog show, both the father and mother of a dog must be registered with the appropriate kennel club. This means that all known breeds have only been allowed to breed within a small subset of the total canine population, reducing the genetic variety in pursuit of arbitrary breed standards. Champion sires are highly sought after for breeding, which means that they've often been used to sire very large numbers of dogs, leading to an increase in the frequency of their genes in the population. This means that the genetic diversity of the population as a whole decreases. Secondly, the use of line breeding, which is the mating of dogs of a closely related gene pool in order to increase desirable characteristics, has led to inbreeding of dogs with potentially disastrous consequences. You see, breeding of highly related dogs is a form of inbreeding, which is well known for the deleterious effects that it can have on a population. We know of the Habsburg dynasty, which ruled much of Europe for over 300 years. During this period, they frequently intermarried, and by the time of the last Habsburg ruler of Spain, Charles II, the effects of inbreeding had left the bewitched king mentally and physically disabled to the point where he could barely chew. Now, for a quick explanation of genetics of inbreeding, animals have two copies of each gene in their genome, one derived from the mother and the other from the father. If you've heard of dominant and recessive genes, you know that there are different variations of each gene, known as alleles. For instance, the colour of your eyes can be determined depending on which particular variation or allele of the same gene that you have. Dominant genes are expressed in the organism with only one copy out of two present, whilst recessive genes require you to have two copies of the same allele in order to express their effect. Having two copies of each gene is protective, as there are many instances when our DNA can mutate, resulting in a gene no longer functioning as it should. In this instance, the other copy can still provide the essential function. This allows many faulty copies of genes to remain undetected in a population, as most individuals with a defective copy will be mere carriers, able to pass the faulty gene down to their children. You can see this in humans. The classic example of a monogenetic, that is caused by one gene, recessive disease is in cystic fibrosis. Here, having two copies of a faulty CFTR gene will lead to the development of thick, sticky mucus in the lungs, digestive system and some endocrine organs. This mucus unfortunately provides pathological bacteria with a very favourable environment in which to live, and the sufferers have a reduced lifespan considerably. In populations with high levels of inbreeding, many members of the group can be carriers of the recessive gene. Should two carriers produce offspring, there is a 25% chance that any one of their progeny will receive 240 copies of the gene and thus suffer clinical symptoms. Assuming a normal mixing of non-related parents, the chances of having a child with cystic fibrosis is low, but the chances increase in a population of related individuals. Now, it should be noted that inbreeding doesn't increase the gene frequency within a population, but rather increases the proportion of homozygotes. Now, homozygote is someone that has two identical alleles of a gene, and that is the opposite of a heterozygote, which has one copy of one allele and another copy of another allele. Now, this increase in homozygotes is why the effects of dangerous recessive alleles is magnified in inbred populations. So anyway, back to dogs. Now, an example of a genetic disease present in a modern dog breed would be the fact that Cardigan Welsh Corgis are susceptible to a disease caused by a recessive gene, progressive retinal atrophy, which leads to a degradation of the photoreceptors of the retina and eventually total blindness. In Rhodesian Ridgebacks, the dorsal ridge is due to a dominant trait and can lead to formation of a dermoid sinus, which are small tube-like structures that penetrate from the skin inwards, sometimes through the muscle, and are often the result of homozygous Ridgeback dogs being mated together. In Merle dogs and those with white coats, deafness is really relatively common, up to 30% in some instances. Now, disorders like this are rare, thankfully. But while straight monogenetic disorders are present but rare, the far larger problem that you'll find today arises from morphological abnormalities. Morphology relates to the shape, size, and anatomy of an organism. One of the most striking things about modern dog breeds is the size variation. Unlike most other animals, dogs can range in size from the smallest, the Chihuahua, to the largest, the Great Dane. Now, first off, to answer the inevitable question that pops into people's heads when they think about this, yes, you can breed a small dog with a large dog. However, if the mother is a small dog, then she can have serious problems attempting to carry and birth the pups, and may require a caesarean birth or termination of the pregnancy, which, if you're interested, is often achieved by spaying. Now, it should be of no surprise to us that coinciding with the extreme morphologies of many modern dogs are tens if not hundreds of disorders ranging from life-threatening to uncomfortable. The arbitrary nature of dog breed standards has led to the development of several different kinds of very serious problems with modern dogs, and unlike monogenetic diseases, which are either present or not depending on the presence of a particular allele, these disorders are present in varying degrees and are polygenetic, meaning that they're caused by the interaction of several different genes. Now, this poses a unique set of challenges, as a simple genetic test will not suffice for the testing of parents, and some dogs will only develop symptoms at later stages of their life. Examples are numerous. Brachycephalic dogs, meaning dogs with short, flat faces, such as pugs, bulldogs, and French bulldogs, and this is especially important because I believe French bulldogs have just become the most popular dog adopted by people in the UK. Boxers and King Charles Spaniels, they all often struggle with exercise and thermoregulation because they're predisposed to have narrow nostrils and relatively elongated soft palates. When they exercise and produce extra carbon dioxide, the dogs often then cannot exhale enough CO2 and they experience severe respiratory distress. I mean, they can't breathe properly. You can see it when you look at a pug, for example, the noise it makes. It's not healthy. And this has led to surgical widening of the nostrils becoming a common procedure in vets all around the country and all over the world. Now, dogs with small craniums, like the King Charles Spaniel, can suffer from Chiari malformations, where the space at the back of the skull is too small and the lowest part of the cerebellum protrudes out, blocking the flow of cerebrospinal fluid, which can lead to pockets of fluid building up in the spinal cord. The increase in pressure from these syrinxes, as they're known, first leads to excruciating pain, enough that it can cause dogs to yelp or scream and progress to paralysis, requiring major surgery or euthanasia. And I'm going to show you a video now that exemplifies this. On the other hand, large dogs, such as Labradors, Rottweilers, and Great Danes, can suffer from secondary arthritis caused by osteochondrosis, where their bones grow so fast that areas of cartilage do not properly convert to bone, leading to thickened areas of weakened cartilage that can detach and form flaps inside the joint. Now, hip dysplasia is very common in many dog breeds. Dogs that have higher levels of hip dysplasia include larger dogs like Labradors, German Shepherds, and Newfoundlands. I had a German Shepherd that suffered from hip dysplasia, and I can tell you that watching your dog's descent into lameness, requiring euthanasia eventually, is absolutely heartbreaking. Toy breeds, that is, very small dogs, the sort you can carry off in a handbag, often have very brittle bones which are very susceptible to stress fractures. Now, I've seen this happen when a dog has simply jumped off something as low as a chair or sofa and had to go to the vet because it's broken a leg. And that's happened in people I know that own Bichon Frises. But the classic example of a dog with an extreme morphology that has destroyed their quality of life is the bulldog. Now, originally, bulldogs were used in the sport of bull baiting, where dogs would attempt to grip a tethered bull's nose and pin it to the ground, whilst the bull would of course resist, leading inevitably to the deaths of several dogs. Now, imagine the kind of dog required to do a sport like this. They were vicious and athletic in order to survive. Fast forward to now, when bulldogs have been bred for dog shows, and what you will find is a dog that can't run very far before becoming exhausted due to its extreme brachycephalic features. It's got a very flat face and it can barely breathe. Up to 94% of bulldog litters are delivered by caesarean section because the head of the puppies cannot fit through the narrow hips. They require daily cleaning of their skin folds to prevent bacterial infections. They often cannot swim and will drown if immersed in water. They frequently suffer from dysfunction of the heart and lungs, and to top it all off, the median age at death is 6.4 years. Now, these are only a very small list of the conditions and problems facing modern dog breeds, and there is a plethora of information available to consult on the internet. Now, before I get accused of presenting a one-sided argument, there are some caveats to the information presented. Namely, some breeds are less prone to health problems and are far healthier than others. An example would be the German Pinscher, which suffers from relatively few conditions and scores very well for hip dysplasia in the breed. The Kennel Club in the UK has said it will not register pups bred from brother-sister, father-daughter or mother-son pairs, and this brings back to line breeding that I was talking about earlier. And kennel clubs around the world have been initiating programs to test for genetic diseases, although this is largely focused on monogenetic diseases, which are the low-hanging fruit. I point this out to emphasise that dog owners and organisations aren't necessarily acting out of a callous disregard for their charges, but rather they do recognise some problems. Some steps are being taken. But despite this, the sad fact is that in our desire for dogs to look a certain way, we have been willing to sacrifice their health and standard of living. For a companion that has walked side by side with man for at least 14,000 years, this is a grave betrayal. Dogs are inherently trusting of humans, and seeing them suffer because of our actions should weigh heavily on our conscience. But they don't have to suffer. Now that we know what the problems are, what can we do about it? Genetic testing for monogenetic disorders was the first step, resulting in some diseases being almost entirely eliminated through successful breeding programs, and were an acknowledgement by the breeding establishment that there were fundamental issues to be addressed with the modern pedigree system. For the remainder of the issues, first we need to remember that genetic and morphological disorders require different approaches. Polygenetic disorders such as hip dysplasia will require more research and present a very difficult challenge for breeders. These will need first to be assessed with widespread testing of all susceptible dogs in combination with veterinary practices, and then addressed with combined strategies of genetic testing, clinical assessment, and breeding programs that focus on the health rather than the appearance of each breed. But there is something more immediate we can do. For morphological abnormalities, the focus is on us, rather than what the scientific and clinical community can do. Now, I'm not about to say that people shouldn't adopt pedigree dogs, but before you do, ask yourself if having a dog that's incredibly undersized, that has short legs and a long body that make it difficult to walk, or finds it hard to breathe because it has a flattened face, is the sort of treatment that should be given to a creature so rightly called man's best friend.